Greetings, one and all, the YouTube community at large. It is I, the family car guy, and today I want to talk about something that I think is kind of a controversial topic. There's different opinions you can find on the internet and on YouTube and various places, but what we want to talk about today is should you or should you not finance a sports car? Should you or should you not finance a sports car? And I guess my response to that is yes. Yes to what? Well, okay, let's get more specific. I think ultimately the answer comes down to it depends. So let me kind of unpack this a little bit. So first of all, let me just say that I'm a Dave Ramsey fan. I appreciate a lot of the content that he puts out. I appreciate his philosophy on debt and things like that. Building up your emergency fund and having savings and all those things, saving for retirement, giving back to people, all those things. So one thing I do disagree with him on, though, is the idea of having zero, basically not using credit whatsoever. Pretty much all debt is bad debt. I don't necessarily agree with that because my wife and I, we've done some real estate ventures, and a lot of real estate people will tell you that one of the best things to help you kind of accelerate in terms of building your wealth and acquiring more properties and doing more deals, et cetera, is leverage. Now you have to be smart about how you use that leverage, but that's what good debt, in my opinion, affords you. Is it you don't use debt to just perpetually not pay your bills or perpetually not pay things off, but sometimes you use it just so you can get into an opportunity, and then once that opportunity materializes in its entirety, then you're able to accelerate beyond that and move past having to borrow at maybe the volume that you'd be borrowing initially. So that being said, talking about should you finance a sports car? Well, again, it goes back to it depends. I mean, when you think about, we got a guy here who doesn't realize it's green. He doesn't realize it's green, and he's taking his sweet time. But anyway, basically, it really depends. So when I think about, like my C4, for example, this is not a car that I would finance, nor would I recommend anyone finance, because this car is from 1996. You know, it's 21 years old. You know, it's a car that you don't finance. And a lot of banks, quite honestly, are not going to finance this car anyway, because most banks, including credit unions and smaller banks, unless it's like a collector car or some kind of a special situation like that, most banks, a little bit of highway acceleration. Most banks, they're not going to finance something like that because it's too much of a risk for them, and so they're not going to do that. If a car is less than 10 years old, generally speaking, it's got, most of its initial depreciation hit has been taken, most banks will finance you in that situation, depending upon your credit. And then also, if it's a new car, obviously they're going to give you a really good deal because that car is brand new, so all of its value is retained. And then also you have to factor in other things, like when you finance a car, most banks are going to require you to have full coverage, and so that's an added expense. So other things like that are going to be, in terms of insurance, are going to have to be factored in when you're talking about the total cost of ownership for a sports car. So there's that aspect of it as well. Now, if you're going to get a newer sports car, in my opinion, again, the answer is it depends on your financial situation. If I was going to go out and buy like a, I don't know, let's just say I was going to go out and buy, let's just say like a used Dodge Viper. So I don't even know what they run. I didn't even look this up before making this video, but let's just guess that they're on the same level as like a used Hellcat. So a used Challenger Hellcat. So used Challenger Hellcats right now, like a 15 or a 16, you're probably looking in the low 60s, maybe high 50s if you're lucky, but probably more like low 60s for a 15 or a 16 Challenger Hellcat. So in that, maybe I'll just stick with the Challenger Hellcat. But anyway, bottom line is, if I had 65 grand just sitting around, would I deploy all of that capital into a sports car? And the answer would be no. And the reason why is, first of all, let me just say that I'm actually an economics major. That was what I majored in college. Look at me being all non-safe, not wearing my seatbelt. Terrible, terrible. Not a good example as a family car guy. Anyway, but I was an economics major in college, and economics is what they call a social science, the science of how people and governments and communities spend money, and how can we put some math to that, and how can we make it how can we kind of quantify how people are spending money and develop theories around it, right? So one of the terminologies that is often discussed in economics is opportunity cost. What are you giving up in order to take advantage of whatever particular opportunity it is? So the opportunity cost, in my opinion, of spending $65,000 on a sports car, which sports cars in general are not a good investment. They're just not. I mean, let's just call it what it is. Cars are depreciating assets. If you're Robert Kiyosaki, you're not even going to call them an asset. You're going to call them a liability because they take money out of your pocket. They don't put money into your pocket. A car can be an asset if it's owned by your business. If you got a business and it's a vehicle that you use to go and make money. If you're a carpenter or an electrician or a plumber or something like that, and that's your work vehicle, then I can see that. But if you're just driving a sports car just because you like it, well, that's not really an asset, right? So ultimately, the opportunity cost of you deploying all of your capital into a depreciating asset, or really a liability that's just a fun liability, in my opinion, is just not wise. If you were to, let's just say you put half down. So let's just say, for the sake of numbers, it's $30,000, right? You put half down, you put $30,000 down. The other $30,000, you put into a savings account. I'm sorry, not a savings account, because definitely you're not going to do anything with a savings account. But let's say you put it into like a investment account that earns 7%. Let's just kind of be conservative here and just say 7%, right? So, or let's just say 10% to make it even easier. So if it earned 10% annually, right? Every year at a minimum, right? If you got $30,000 after the first year, you just made $3,000 on your initial investment of 30 grand, right? Is a car going to be able to do that for you? No. So the opportunity cost, the amount that you're giving up by putting all $60,000 into your slightly used Hellcat or Viper, you're giving up that $3,000, and then of course it builds upon that. Let's say you have a 5-year loan, it builds upon that every year. Now you're talking about 10% of $33,000, and so on and so on and so on over the 5 years. So ultimately, you have to ask yourself, what am I giving up in order to acquire this sports car, and if I want to pay it off cash? Of course you want to buy it cash. Generally speaking, I believe that you should buy pretty much everything cash, but I do think that having capital to take advantage of opportunities, whether it be real estate, whether it be trends in the stock market, if that's your thing, what do they call it? Trading currencies, things like that. There's people that are into Bitcoin and all the digital currencies trading right now, investing in small businesses, things like that. You take those opportunities. I don't want to say you take them off the table, because again, it depends on your financial situation, but you always have to consider that when you're buying a sports car. Now, as the family car guy, obviously for me, I have to think about, okay, what are my kids, what do my kids need? What are the needs of my family? And I also have to factor that in. But ultimately, as a man, I think it's wise to always have an eye towards the future. So even though it's good to enjoy, why do we get sports cars and things like that? Because we want to enjoy them, right? We want to enjoy the fruits of our labor. We want to have a good time. We want to enjoy if we're working a regular job, we want to enjoy our commute to work. We want to enjoy hanging out on the weekends. Another C4 going the other way, convertible. We want to enjoy our time. And so ultimately, when you make that decision, you've got to make it, if you've got a family, you've got to make it with an eye towards the future. That would be my advice. So if you're going to buy a car like me, and one of the things that kind of what my dad taught me growing up was, David, try to stick to cars that are $10,000 and less. And that's not because I'm trying to get you to be cheap, but because ultimately you have to have an eye towards the future. You're gonna, once you get a job and once you start working full time, and this is back when I was in college, he's telling me this, it's gonna feel like you have a lot of money because this will be the most money you've ever made to this point. But it's gonna be, when you start factoring in how much it costs to, buy a house or, rent a place or, and then eventually, you'll get married and those types of things. Now you're going to have to factor in those living expenses on top of whatever car you're driving. So for you to just start out with a really $30,000, $40,000 car, yeah, that's great, but you don't want a $500, $600, $700 a month payment putting pressure on you when you're first starting out. And I had student loans coming out of college. I paid them off now, but at the time, I was kind of like, man, I want a newer car. I want a newer, nicer sports car. But instead, at the time, I had a Nissan Maxima. I think it was like a 2000 or 2001 silver. And my dad was right. I think my payment was slightly less than $200 a month. It was like $185 a month or something like that. And that car was a pretty fun car. I mean, they called the Nissan Maxima at the time the four-door sports car because it was a lot sportier than, like the Accord or the Camry at the time. So that car was an automatic, but I had a few Maximas before that. I had a 1990 and a 94, and my 90 was a stick. So I had kind of gotten comfortable in that under $10,000 range or right around $10,000 range until I bought a 2006 G35X. And that car was I think that car was like 11.5 or something like that. And I had that up until actually January of this year. In January of this year, actually, there was a really, really bad snowstorm, and we got some really tight curves at the place where I work. And I had Blizzaks on the car, everything, four-wheel drive, but I hit a patch of ice just right. The car slid out wide and scraped the fence. And, obviously hindsight being 20/20, it was dark outside, and, I could see fine, but, given that the snow had just fallen, it was falling the entire time I was at work, so when I left work, and it was fairly late when I left work, it was probably like 7 o'clock, hindsight being 20/20, probably shouldn't have as confidently taken that corner, or probably should have, been much more conservative with my speed. Not that I'd say that I was flying around the corner, but nonetheless, that car was totaled, and then I got an M35, and then eventually I got, sold that, and now I have the C4. But ultimately, I had stuck around that price range, and the main reason why I did that was because I really wanted to take my dad's advice. I wanted to be able to spend money on other things, go on vacation, be able to be in a position to buy a house, those types of things. So I didn't want to get into a sports car, a really expensive, really nice car, too soon, And again, it all depends. But ultimately for me, that was kind of my goal, was, okay, I don't want to have to be worrying about a car payment or worrying about, you know, especially being an economics major and reading about, you know, people's philosophies like Robert Kiyosaki and Dave Ramsey, who will tell you, you know, having a car it's fine if you can afford it, right? But you don't want to be buying too much car. And so that's kind of my philosophy is, if you're going to buy a sports car, by all means do it, but always make sure that you're having an eye towards the future when you do it. You know, don't just go out and buy a sports car because you can quote unquote make the payments. You know, there's people that are making, you know, $70,000 a year, which is fine. You know, it's a decent salary, but then they're having $700 a month payments, and it's like, well, that's great. But what happens when you want to buy a house if you don't already have a house? What happens if you get serious with, you know, your significant other, and now you want to plan a wedding and then, you know, start a family and buy a bigger house or whatever the case may be? You know, what if you've got student loans? You know, those types of things. You know, do you have an eye towards the future? Are you already in a position where you've got some savings built up? You know, for me, even with the C4, even though I bought it cash, you know, my wife and I, we've already established our emergency fund. We've already done, you know, kind of the necessary baby steps, you know, in the Dave Ramsey. He's got like I think it's like his 6 baby steps. So we've already done some of those things, and we're still en route. You know, we're not like, you know, like I said, we're not super rich. We're not, you know, it's not like we have zero debt whatsoever, but we put ourselves in a position to where having a sports car of this caliber is like, you know, it made sense for our family, and it didn't adversely affect our family. And that's the other thing too, being the family car guy, having an eye towards the future. Ultimately, you know, there's a reason why family is in front of car. You know, you got to make a decision with an eye towards the future, and you got to make a decision in the best interest of your family. Cars come and go, but people do not. I've had a bunch of cars in my life, and I know I've had friends who have way more cars than me, and it's like, cars come and go, you know, but people don't. You know, like your family, you know, your wife, your kids, you know, if you're blessed to have like really, really close friends, lifelong friends, those relationships are more important than anything else, you know. And so for me, it's like a hunk of metal on wheels is not going to be more important than my kids or my wife or my good friends or what have you. So because of that, that's another reason why, again, when you make a car buying decision, at least for me, it's always having an eye towards the future. In my opinion, if you have a ridiculous amount of debt, if you got, you know, if you're not able to save money every month, if you're not able to build up an emergency fund, I don't think it's wise for you to go out and get a sports car at this particular time. Because you want to have a plan, you want to be able to be comfortable, you really want to enjoy the car. You don't want to lose sleep over, you know, being able to make your payments, being able to pay the insurance, being able to fill it up with gas. You know, if something goes wrong with the car, you don't want to be freaking out like, crap, how am I going to pay for this? Because I got a really nice sports car, which means it's probably not going to be that cheap to fix. So now I got to think about, how am I going to pay for this? You know, I mean, even on this car, you know, depending upon the season and things like that, the performance tires on this car is probably, I don't know, $200 a piece at least. You know, which for a 1996, to me, that's a little pricey. I mean, for a newer car, that's nothing. I mean, if we're talking a new Corvette, those, you know, Michelin Pilot Super Sports can easily top over $300 a piece. So, you know, all things considered, that's not that bad. But even for this car, I would argue that the tires can get pricey. So, things like that are things that need to be considered. Synthetic oil changes, things like that. All those things need to be taken into account. So ultimately, if you buy too much car, you know, it's not the end of the world, but you really want to enjoy it, you know, and you don't want to be in a position also when you're you know, where you're upside down, to where, you know, the amount that you owe on the car is higher now than the value of the car. You know, you bought the car for 60 grand, all of a sudden now the car's only worth 50 grand. So, you know, even if you sell it for what it's worth, you're still 10 grand behind, right? So things like that, all those things need to be considered when you're going to buy a sports car. And also, the other thing I wanted to bring up too is most people that buy sports cars, it's not their, and if they're a family person like me, if you've already got a family, it's not your primary vehicle. So that's the other thing I wanted to bring up too, is a car that's not going to be your primary vehicle. It also makes sense for you to, again, like I said, have an eye towards the future. This is not the primary vehicle, you know. The priority of keeping other cars in the house functional and keeping them in good shape and well maintained and things like that. I mean, for example, being the family car guy, and I will do another video on this, we do have a minivan, and man, I'll tell you what, guys, I did not want a van. I was like, we're gonna get a Yukon or an Escalade or a Suburban or a Sequoia or anything but a minivan. But ultimately, my wife was like, listen, we got 3 kids, and when you're at work and you're doing your work things, I'm the person who has to take care of these kids, and I need to be able to hit a button and all the doors open, the trunk opens, all the sliding doors, everything. The kids can't buckle themselves, things like that. So I'm gonna need a car that works for me. So I said, all right, fine. Well, we ended up getting a minivan, and I thought, man, this car is so logical, you know? And also, you know, when you do get your sports car, you don't feel so bad about having a minivan, because it's like, well, you know, at least when I go home and it's just me, I can drive my sports car. So you don't feel as bad about having a minivan. But minivans make a lot of sense. Take it from me, who is currently driving a Corvette, I can confidently tell you that you can relax, you can retain your van card, and still get a minivan. You'll be all right. But ultimately, that is the car that's carrying, you know, my wife and my kids. You know, the most important things to me, not my cars, right? But it's my wife and my kids. So therefore, I want to make sure that she's okay, that car is running fine, those types of things. So again, doing it with an eye towards the future. And so that's pretty much my thoughts on financing a car, buying a car. I think if you're going to get a sports car, you can absolutely fulfill your passion for cars by staying under 10 grand. There's a lot of cars that are fast, that handle well for less than 10 grand, especially in 2017. I mean, the used car market, I think, is phenomenal right now. I mean, if you wanted a G35 coupe, I mean, you're not going to find one with low miles probably for less than 10 grand, at least not where I live, but you could get a G35 coupe 6-speed for less than 10 grand. You could get a BMW 330 sedan for less than 10 grand, a 2006, 2007. You can get a 335 in some cases for less than 10 grand, although I'm very concerned about those motors, those twin turbo motors. Even though they're fast, they tend to have some issues, which is why I'd probably go for a 330. I mean, the 330s are not super fast, but they're, you know, they're quick enough. They handle great, and they look good. Golf GTIs. I mean, older GTIs, you know, you could find. Jetta GLIs if you need the 4 doors, you know, and you don't necessarily like the hatchback, you know, with the 1.8 turbo motor, I mean, and the 2.0 turbo motor in later models. You can find those, and there's plenty of aftermarket parts for those. Obviously, the car I'm in right now, the C4 Corvette, there's a bunch of them. Are you going to find one with low miles for less than 10 grand? Well, it really depends. It honestly does, because I've seen some for less than 10. But then, you know, and they look like they may be well maintained, but they may have a few issues here and there, or, you know, in the case of mine has a salvage title, so I mean, that's just what it is. And I really wanted a 6-speed, and I really wanted the LT4 motor, so there's that. But if you get an early 90s one, you can definitely get one for less than 10 grand and enjoy, you know, all the basic reasons why people like Corvettes, right? You know, their style, you know, their power, you know, if you like the target top or you like the convertible, you got that option as well. So there's a lot of different cars that you can get for under 10 grand, if that's kind of, you know, and that's kind of where I would start if I was in a position where you're like me, where you've got a family. If you can figure out a way to get a car, you know, if you can save up 5 to 10 grand, you can absolutely get a car that you will enjoy every single day, that will still be fun, you know, and will still tick all the check boxes that you need, or at least most of the check boxes that you need in order for the car to function every day. Like I said, I mean, this car, in my previous video, this car actually gets, you know, 30 miles to the gallon on the highway in 6th gear. So it actually is relatively frugal for what it is, you know, as long as I'm cruising with it. So there's definitely a way for you to make this work. And so that's what I want to encourage you guys today is, you know, if you got a family, if you had to get rid of your sports car as soon as you got married, or as soon as you started having kids, you know, as soon as you got to that second kid, and it's like, oh man, now we gotta go get a minivan, we gotta go get an SUV, you know, a crossover, whatever the case may be. You know, you can make it work. You really can. You know, if you can figure out a way to save every month, you know, put aside, you know, $250 a month or something like that, or if you can really go for it, $500 a month, you know, in a year you're at $6,000, you know, and that can get you into some of the cars I just named, you know. So, and then a bonus tip, a family car guy hack: if you buy from a dealer, and they will allow you to they will allow you to pay by credit card, and I'm saying this after you have accumulated all the cash, not before, after. A bonus tip is if you have a credit card that has some kind of rewards, like I have a credit card that basically allows me to stack up points so that I can use them for like airlines and hotels and things like that. You can buy the car on the credit card, immediately pay the credit card, and now you got a bunch of points, and now you can take your family on a vacation that is mostly paid for by those points. Family car guy hack. See, I'm here to help you. I'm here to help you win points with your wife, as well as get your sports car and fulfill that passion. That's what we do here. So that's gonna pretty much do it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed the content. Please like and subscribe. And until next time, you guys have a blessed day.